it's me, Jess. Welcome to my channel. I'm here with another channeled message. This is a specific message. It might resonate with you. It might not. All right. So this is a very interesting energy that I'm picking up on because I'm seeing Uranus in my mind. So I feel like something here has just happened and it was out of the blue, or it was very sudden, very shocking or unexpected here in some kind of way. It could have been a message, or it could have been something that you saw or witnessed and you didn't know how to interpret it. I feel like it really stopped you in your tracks. It got your attention at the very least. It caused you to really look up, really, see somebody, really observe somebody. And it may have actually ruffled your feathers a little bit. It feels like you didn't exactly know how to interpret it. And I do think that you need more information here in this situation in order to understand what something here truly means. And I think that, like I said, your ears are perked up. You're observing here. You are in the process of obtaining that, and you might not know how to go about getting that information, bridging that gap, starting that conversation. So it feels like you're just watching for now. And it feels like whoever this is that you're really observing, they have some kind of a leonine quality to them. So Leo rules over a lot of different things. So take this however it resonates. But I mean, it rules over the fifth house of love and romance and children and theater and play. But it also rules over things like legacy and leadership. So I think there's something here that you're in conflict with, or you're not sure if you're in conflict with it. It's like to be decided, right? To be determined. And you're in that kind of freeze frame energy. And I think that something here is about to be unearthed. And I think it's like you misunderstood something, or you misunderstood where somebody was coming from, something here like that. And it's not necessarily even a bad thing, because I think some of you are realizing that you actually have a lot more in common with somebody than you thought that you did. But others of you are realizing that there's maybe a rift or a difference, and that somebody is not who you thought they were. Because it feels like there has been a misunderstanding. And I think the misunderstanding actually has to do with language and the way that we use language. And this feels like a broad issue. It doesn't feel like something wrong with the way you're using language or that they're using language. It just seems like it's an issue with language and the way that it functions, if that makes sense, and the way that some of us relate to different terms. So there's a philosophical issue around this. Okay, so certain words mean certain things, right? But we might use words in a different way based on our philosophy. And philosophy can be kind of a broad thing. So I'm just getting the sense that you and this person, you could have been hearing the words that they were saying, and to you it meant one thing because of your personhood and your philosophy, and to them it meant something else because of their personhood and their philosophy. So there's a difference in philosophy here is really what I'm getting, and there's a difference in worldview, either than you thought it was with this person, or maybe possibly between the two of you. And it's not necessarily even feeling like a deal breaker energy. It's just like a and I feel like it's really gotten your attention, and I think it was supposed to, on some kind of spiritual level, where it's look closer, look deeper. There's more nuance here. That's what it is. It's encouraging you towards a more nuanced view of this person, or it's encouraging you, for some of you, to take up a more nuanced exploration of your own philosophy or of this person's philosophy in order to bridge the gap here. And it feels like a process that kind of needs to unfold, or something here that needed to be realized in order to maybe unearth this misunderstanding, or actually to resolve, for some of you, some kind of misunderstanding. I feel like this could really actually go both ways, funny enough. And okay, so I want to use an example, and it has to do with witchcraft, okay? Because somebody just told me the other day that there's, I guess, people on YouTube or TikTok or whatever, and they call themselves ex-witches, or some of them are very, very Christian or something like that. And so they position themselves against witches. And some of them, like I said, they have identified as being witchy in the past, and they feel like it's bad now. And so they market themselves online as people who oppose witches, and they do some really crazy things. But the things that they do is giving witchcraft. You know what I'm saying? Some of these people are marking their property with grape juice, the blood of Christ or something. Bitch, that's witchcraft. Or they do rituals and stuff to protect themselves against witches, but is witchcraft. You see what I'm saying? And so to me, that's a language issue, Because to me, in their actions, there's an admission that they don't not believe in craft. What I mean is, these are people that acknowledge when somebody throws energy at you, it has an effect, or it can have an effect. They're not in disagreement with that. And their response to that is what they would consider a more ethical use of witchcraft. So to me, it's not, oh, I'm not a witch and I don't believe in witches. I think your hypocrisy is very much shown that that's not where you stand. I think it's just that you believe in the ethical use of witchcraft. And it's so important to frame it that way, because when you frame it that way, you'll find that there's actually a lot of witches, people who identify as witches, that feel the same way as you. There's actually quite a bit of overlap, and there's no reason to create a feud or to create an enemy. And some of these people are like actively going after other people that identify one way, but that word means something different, to one group than it does to another group. And I think this other group is really substituting that for meaning unethical instead of somebody who understands the power of energy. They also understand the power of energy, and they're trying to harness it in defense. Personally, I agree with that ethos. I think magic is best used in terms of defense and in terms of the truth I seek comes gently at me in ways that I can process aptly. That's the kind of spells I do, right? I don't believe in trying to usurp the sovereignty and the will of another person. That I do believe is wrong. And I feel like we should be talking about that, though, from that perspective of that more like, are we being ethical? Having that more nuanced perspective. And you don't create an enemy in that way. So I feel like there's something here in some kind of arena where you actually agree with somebody that you thought you disagreed with, and you actually don't agree with somebody that you thought you agreed with, but that can only be discovered through flushing out the nuance of the situation and actually getting deeper and actually listening to really understand what somebody here is trying to say to you. And this somehow ties in with this leonine energy. It has to do with philosophy. But I feel like the trick here is you've got to get around the language of it all. And I'm kind of getting this energy of like buzzwords, but it doesn't have to be buzzwords in terms of like society. Like we all have like the same buzzword. It could be buzzwords within your own mind. And what I think would create a buzzword within somebody's own mind is when you think about your own philosophies, you have a way that you think about it. And you have certain concepts and therefore certain words that you probably use very often in your mind to describe your own philosophies. And you're using those words correctly. And I think maybe another person here that you think you agree with or disagree with, because I think it might go both ways here, because I feel like in fleshing out the depth and in fleshing out the nuance, I think there's a flip here. Or of like, wait a second, I actually agree with you more than I thought, or I thought I agreed with you, but now I disagree with you. There's some kind of movement like that, because whoever it is that you're speaking to has a different way of relating to that particular buzzword in your own mind, or maybe it's a buzzword in their mind. You have different ways of relating to those words. And it's not because somebody is using the word incorrectly. I think definitionally, you're both using the word correctly, but it's tied in some way to philosophy, somebody's personal philosophy. And philosophy always has a depth to it. It has a well-roundedness. It has a life experience of a way that we kind of relate to that word. So I feel there's a need here to flush that out and to kind of get around using certain words and terminologies and really get to the heart of it. And I think that has to do with communication skills, because there may almost, this feels like a third-party situation here where I think you feel aligned with somebody here, and maybe everybody, I'm getting confused, but like everybody here could have in some way, shape, or form this like leonine quality. But like possibly in a different way, because like I said, Leo rules over a lot of things, like leadership and legacy, but also romance and children and love. So I don't know, for some of you, one of these people in this third party could be a child. The other one could be a love interest. The other one could be a leader. The other one could be possibly a father. Leo can be that. Like people can be in these different positions. And I get the sense that you think that you're more aligned with somebody here. And actually, when you go through the process of flushing out the beliefs of somebody that you think you disagree with because of the words that you're using, you may actually find that you agree more with that person, with the heart of their concepts, with what they're trying to say. then you actually agree with the person you thought you originally agreed with. And that could happen on a superficiality level. So what I mean by that is, at first blush, when you're not taking a deep cut into whatever this topic of conversation is, you think that you agree with somebody else. Just like using that word witch. Well, I disagree with witches. Okay, well, if I redefine the word witch for you in terms of my worldview, how do you feel about that concept? And I almost, even like when I was trying to say that, I wanted to be like, now how do you feel about witches? I still didn't trust that that person was going to be able to get around the word witches. So I just substituted that out and say, like, when I explain the way that I think about witches and witchcraft to you, now what do you think about it? Because in my definition, priests are witches. They're the biggest witches of all. They wear headdresses, they do rituals, they say chants. That to me, it's moving energy, right? They have a particular way they do it, just like any other witch, but that's craft, right? So now that I've expressed that to you, now what do you think about it? Like, it's that kind of a thing of like, something here needs to be defined. Like, one person needs to define it, another person needs to define it and kind of like flesh it out, but that has to be done with the utmost of respect. And that's another thing where I feel like could be off here, like listening with the inner ear, because somebody may, there could be some Dunning-Kruger. And just to be clear, Dunning-Kruger, like the Dunning-Kruger effect, it doesn't mean that somebody is blanket stupid, okay? It just means that somebody doesn't have as much knowledge in a certain arena. They only have a superficial knowledge, but they have made up an opinion about it, and there's a lot of confidence behind that opinion. And the confidence would weaken the more details and nuance that they learned about that subject. I'm also like tying this back into religion and stuff. There's a lot of fear around, say, for instance, witches. And what that does is it prevents somebody from learning more about witches because they think it's blanket evil. And so that almost guarantees a misunderstanding and empathy. It guarantees that there will not be empathy for somebody else's perspective. It puts the wedge there, possibly so that someone else can be a leader. If I'm not saying that's on purpose what's happening, but like, somebody could be benefiting here in terms of like power or stance or something by like driving some kind of wedge here, but between people who don't actually have a wedge, like a differing perspective. Somebody could be benefiting from staying on a superficial level of understanding and not actually diving deeper into the nuance of it. Does that make sense? This is so hard to talk about, right? And I think the only way to get around it is to approach this conversation in good faith. And what I mean is, I think there could be a person here, or possibly multiple people here, that have a touch of the zealot. And what I mean is, like, they feel very strongly and very emotionally about something. And their personal identity in some way could be wrapped up into something. So that's ego death energy that you've just created a lot of pressure around, where if somebody takes a more nuanced perspective on something and therefore maybe distances themselves from a previous stance or group or label, then it threatens their personhood, their very personhood. That's ego death territory. And somebody here could be afraid of that within themselves. So there is actually motive. There's internal motive to not understand on a deeper level what somebody else is saying, so that they don't have to confront their associations, or they don't have to confront the holes in their philosophy, or wait, now all of a sudden I'm a friend with this person. Like, it's ego death kind of territory. But the other aspect of somebody here potentially approaching with the perspective of being a zealot is that when they approach the communication space with this other person, which is listening and speaking, it shuts that down because their number one goal is to change your mind. They have a persuasive stance in regards of communication, which is communicating in bad faith. And they could be lying about this too. They could present a face of neutrality and they could state a different goal. Like, no, I really do want to understand you. And they may well want to understand you, but that's just a very superficial first goal, because if they understand you, then they can change your position. They can change your opinion. They want to persuade you to their side. So they're a bad faith actor. And if you're going to suss this out, you have to hold yourself accountable for that. Everybody involved in this situation has to be willing to check their pride, check their ego, and hold themselves accountable for not acting in bad faith, not communicating in bad faith, and really communicating in good faith. And that means, I just heard reaching across the aisle. So for some of you, this is like a political thing. It means really reaching into the other person's sphere and listening with the inner ear, listening beyond buzzwords and language, and actually listening to what someone is trying to tell you about their values and about their priorities, and understanding that the nuance matters here. So you have a worldview and you have priorities. In your worldview, you have the way that you think something works. You have to put all of that down in order to really listen to someone else's. You have to build their worldview in your mind. You ever heard of building a mental map? You have to build a mental map of this person's worldview independent of your worldview, and how they relate to their philosophies and their, this and that. Because they relate to certain things differently than you do. They weight them differently. And I think there's quite a bit of copacetic here. There's a lot of agreement here. But I feel like it's something like order of operations could be off. Yes, I agree with you, but this has to happen before this, because otherwise it's unethical. Otherwise, we're shooting ourselves in the foot, or it's like a moot point. It's something here like that. Or like, yes, I agree with you that we need to do X, Y, or Z. But we have to make sure that we're doing this while we're doing it. Otherwise, it's unethical, or it's not going to work or something with like my value system because of this, that, or the other thing. And I just heard, like I heard some kind of like aha moment here, because you actually probably share like the base of your concerns are like the same, or the base of your worldview is the same, but it's the differences, the touches that are different. And I think there will be a switching of allegiance here if you can actually flush this out, where you're going to recognize it's going to pull you away from somebody or something or a group or an identity that you thought you had more in common with. And it's actually going to pull you closer to somebody that you thought you disagreed with. And you're going to be able to kind of work together to create a more cohesive worldview is what I'm getting, or a more cohesive solution or pattern. And going back to what I said at the beginning of this, it feels like framing something in such a way that it does not create an enemy. And it's actually, because you're going to be able to hear the commonality. Like, oh, we actually agree on this. Right? And I wasn't thinking about this weird little nuanced thing. And they are right about that. And you advocate for them. And they're probably going to do the same for you. Of like, yeah, and I didn't realize that they meant this when they said this. And I also agree with that. And when they said that they thought about this other thing, I didn't think about that. And we should do that too. And it creates some kind of, you find out, I'm not saying you're going to agree with everything with this person, but you agree more than you think you do here with somebody. And potentially there's another person here where after learning something, or after whatever this Uranus energy was that like hit and you didn't know what it meant, or didn't know how to process it. There's somebody here that you thought you agreed with, but it's just on a superficial level, actually. It's just because they use the same buzzwords that you do in the same way that you do. And because of that, you thought just the same way that you thought, because of that, on that level, you thought you disagreed with this other person and you actually agree with them. You thought you agreed with this person because of they use the same buzzwords that you do in the same exact way. But actually, when you start to flush out the nuances and the depth of like this other person, you disagree with them more and more. So there's something here like that. And I don't know which way this goes, but I feel like it's creating some kind of conflict, and there's karma here involved, but processing through it actually helps you, I think, with your fifth house. So it helps you in terms of romance, possibly children, especially a blockage with a child. And maybe for some of you, that's literally what you're asking about. You're having some type of disagreement with a child or about a child. And this is working through some kind of karma, but it is slow going usually whenever you're working through karma, because there's something you get wrong in the approach with karma. I'm talking about all of us in any karmas that we work through. So you intentionally have to slow down. I always kind of think about, those inserts you can put in like a dog bowl or a cat bowl if your cat or dog eats too fast, and you force them to slow down because they hurt themselves when they go too fast. Well, you're going too fast here because something is like a well-ingrained pattern with you, and it needs to be undone, and possibly in these other people too. Like it needs to go slow because you have to consider another way of doing it. So it's not going to be muscle memory just yet. You know what I mean? So you have to like really observe the landscape and try something different and try to, pull apart the karmic knot like bit by bit. And then once you get it untangled, it's that aha moment, like, oh, I get it. I get it. And then you can start to practice your new routine where you've integrated your new knowledge. So you've come up with a different approach, and then you're going to start to build that speed, and then it's just going to become second nature to you, and you never have to think about it once you build that new muscle memory. That's kind of the process that I see going on here. And it is very karmic, and it does have to do with the fifth house. So some kind of karma to do with the fifth house, romance, children, legacy, leadership, theater, play, something here like that. And just disentangling it. So you meet, I just heard meeting of the minds. So there's somebody here where you really actually meet at a depth. Like your cores are very similar, but you possibly have had very different life experiences, and therefore you use words differently, but you mean the same thing. Your hearts are actually very similar. And I think that, and you might look very different from this person, or the life that you live is very different than this person or something, but like there's a similarity here. But so there's somebody here where there's an association on a superficial level, and there's somebody here where there's an association on a deep level, like on a depth level. But it appears like it's an incompatibility on a superficial level. But it's just because of the way, I think that just the way that you're using language prevents you from seeing the commonality between the two of you. And that's what I'm getting. This was a hard one to explain, but I think that mimics the situation that you're in, where it's like, wait a second, you really have to pause. You really have to slow down. You really have to listen with the inner ear. And you have to approach this from a good faith perspective, which is, I'm really listening to try to understand your heart, your values, your priorities, your order of operations, your philosophy. And I understand that you exist independent of me. So what you're trying to say is you have a foundation for your beliefs. It's just like, I know that we're talking to witches here, right? So if you're into astrology, like Western astrology and Eastern astrology, those are two different systems. There's a lot that's very similar about them. And how can it be that you can be a Gemini in one chart and a Cancer in another system? Well, it's because it's not just about your sun sign, is it? There's a way that all of these energies stack up. And just because they're stacking them up differently, they kind of equate to the same result. If you read a Western chart and an Eastern chart, they really equate to a lot of the same energy. It's just the way it's saying it is different. It's a language thing. See, I'm a Gemini, by the way, and this is I kind of have an innate understanding of this. It's air sign energy. We love to flit here, there, and everywhere. But to understand the language of something different is you have to just understand that this exists separately from the group or the whatever that you just came from, and that it deserves to be understood all in itself, in its own context. But you got to build it up from the foundation to really see the truth of it, the heart of it. And that's what I know for sure. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk. That's what I have. I hope that made sense. If not, maybe try to go slower. That's what I feel like the key is. And I really also think that you have to knock your assumptions. I just heard that phrase. You know what it means to assume? It's to make an ass out of you and me. So I think you can't assume that you know what something means here. Not because you're stupid and not because you're using the words wrong. I really don't get that that's the case here. I think everyone is definitionally using words correctly. But words have multiple meanings, and especially when they're connected to philosophies. So when you're having a conversation that is in the more philosophy, religion, social, emotional, political realms, these words do not exist in a vacuum. They're very much connected in to life experience, emotional experience, philosophical experience. They take on this kind of fuller flavor. So that's what I'm saying. I would just caution you from making assumptions here and just ask clarifying questions. What do you mean when you say that? Or make a reflective statement. So do you mean this or that? And really watch your tone and stuff, and have it be open. Allow this person to feel safe, not so that you can ambush them and fuck them up with a bad faith attitude. Really be pro-social, really be cooperative. Seek to understand. You can even say okay, well, I still think I disagree with that, but thank you for sharing or something, because it's okay to disagree as well, so long as people are civil. And I'm not trying to lecture you, so I'm just going to call that a day. So, again, if that resonates, please comment, and subscribe to my channel. Best of luck with this one. It's going to take a second for you to kind of parse through it, I feel like. But it's worth the effort, just like most karmic experiences we find ourselves in. It's worth that kind of annoyance of running into the obstacle, going slow, chewing through it, and reassessing. All right, that's what I have for you. Please subscribe. Bye.